Hello, hello, beautiful and amazing people. I really want to apologize for the issues that we had. There are some technical difficulties. I don't know on whose end it was, but yeah, regardless, I couldn't justify putting up a stream that was that bad quality. Um, so instead, Shane and I are going to be recording this video, and it's going to be great, it's going to be good, and I'll put it up on YouTube, which is where you're definitely seeing this. So, Shane, would you be willing to
Yes.
reintroduce yourself?
Yes. Okay. In general, I'm Shane. I'm a non-binary trans guy. I go by he, they, and I am a writer, and I write across various genres, and I draw art sometimes too. So, general introduction.
Wonderful. What kind of stuff do you enjoy writing, Shane?
Uh, Currently, I really like writing horror stories and fantasy stories, but mostly about like the experience of being like queer and trans,
Mm-hmm.
and most of my characters are queer or trans in some way.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, I wanted to touch on a little bit about why it's so important for us as trans and queer people to write our own representation. Because it's very important for all different minorities for them to be in charge of their own representation, or at least that's what I feel. But especially with the gender and sexuality, there are some nuances for it that kind of go across various other bounds that you may not see with some other minority representation. For instance, everyone, regardless of their race, who is trans may have some rather similar experiences in certain areas. Stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
That just aren't really touched on very well whenever I see someone who's cishet try and tackle those issues.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you feel about that?
I mean, like in general, just sort of
Yeah,
a
just,
collective experience from marginalized people.
yeah.
Uh, Um, I'm trying to think.
Take your time.
um, in general, like something that marginalized people go through that non-marginalized people don't realize, I would say, is like, are we talking in writing or are we talking in life in general?
Media representation in general.
Media representation. Um, this is visibility at all, because being like cisgender and straight is like the norm,
Mm-hmm.
and like being abled is like the norm. So you never really see like a true experience, because a lot of people that write these stories, like a lot of the queer stories and marginalized stories in media, are straight cis white people usually.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not portrayed correctly, or
Mm-hmm.
it's portrayed like it's got to be inspirational in some way or
Right.
overly tragic in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of like they don't understand like people who require like wheelchairs or assistive devices. They don't actually understand how that works. Or like for trans people in the trans experience, they don't it's like they over glor no, I don't want to say glorify. They overdo like the violence that we go through, or they severely underplay it. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like there's never a middle ground. I
Right.
don't even know if I'm answering this question right, but doing
That's
the
okay.
best
There
I
is no
can.
wrong way to answer it.
Um, yeah, so I would say they just don't understand. They don't understand that the experience of a marginalized person isn't always so loud,
Mm-hmm.
always so like extreme, I guess.
Right. I've noticed that a lot of portrayals seem to, and I see this with TERFs a lot.
Mhm.
Um, but it's almost as if me being trans is all there is,
Yeah.
and every other thing that I go through is somehow interwoven and interconnected in this thing. It's like I don't just enjoy video games as someone who is a gamer. I enjoy video games, and here's the
Mm.
incredibly intrinsic or tragic or hopeful way that it intersects with my transness.
Yeah.
And it's like, nah, bitch, I just like playing Stardew Valley.
Yeah, it's like you're no longer a person who is like an artist or a writer or a gamer or a streamer or whatever. You're just like you're trans.
Right.
And it's
And,
like they think that's like 100% of everything that consumes our lives is being trans.
right? And I, of course, kind of lean into this because, like, I lean into the, oh, I'm a trans creator. I run
Mhm.
Tran, like I lean into
Mm.
that. But
Yeah.
there are a lot of people that don't want to. Like, I know a few people, I've met a few streamers that are trans, and they hate that that's become a focal point of their channel and that they constantly
Mhm.
have to, like, talk about being trans and bring up all these other issues. And it's like, they just want to play games. They just want to do this. They don't want to have to
Mhm.
constantly be like, you know, let's completely dissect this issue that came up. That way I can explain to you, poor audience, why it's fucked up.
Yeah. It's exhausting to
It
have to
is.
talk about that all the time because it's like it's stressful and it's like people who don't understand, I guess, that it's like they think like since it's our regular experience, it should be no problem for us to just explain it all the time. And it's like, no, sometimes we just want to stream and just be a streamer. Or,
Right.
sometimes we don't want to talk about trans issues or, point out what you're, because like intrinsically we're human.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be nice to get to a day where it's like being trans isn't such a big deal and, we're just people. But it's
Right.
just not a thing yet.
I love it, but I hate it. Um,
Mm.
I know that like in a lot of media that I've seen, especially older media, uh especially trans women are treated as these like villains. And you see this in a lot of old
Mhm.
horror movies. They come out as villains, like Psycho
Yeah.
and stuff like that. Um and I really hate that in a lot of media representation, all the trans women are either massive perverts, nymphomaniacs, which is kind of more or less the same, but like one
Yeah.
serves the patriarchy, whereas the other one is, yeah.
Mhm.
Or we're depicted as just these crazy, misguided men. And then you have trans dudes that always veer between either ooh woo soft boy who's needs to be protected and everyone is still super
Mhm.
misogynistic against and all this other shit, or super mega buff dude who's like fucking Sylvester Stallone in this bitch,
Mhm.
or you have this like incredible grain of wisdom wise man who's so above everything and has transcended gender.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't even care if you call me a man, I know who I am. It's like, what?
I would have you seen the L word?
Have I seen what?
The L word.
No, I haven't.
Okay, so there's a trans man in the L word, and that was one of my first exposures to a trans man.
Mm-hmm.
And I now know what a disaster it was because obviously the L word is about lesbians, kind of like Queer as Folk is about gay men.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically the polar opposite of Queer as Folk. And so you get, this person who starts realizing they're trans and they're not a lesbian, but they're a straight guy who likes women. And it's just handled horribly because when he goes by Max, when he starts taking testosterone,
Mm-hmm.
they just made him into this violent, angry jerk that because I guess he was taking too much testosterone. And the other problem was that not only was he abusive towards his girlfriend, um, then he realizes he likes men as well. So then he starts dating this gay guy. who then gets him pregnant, and then they have a baby shower, and Max is pregnant, and I'm just watching this, and I'm like, why is that the story you're telling? Like I get it,
It's
and
like
every
they went out of their way to tell a cishet story using queer
yeah,
people.
it's also like they took the most extreme things that are like shocking about being a trans man and just focused on those. And it's that was like if I had to think of one example in media
Hmm.
of a trans man that was just so annoying, it was the L word. And it was made that show was made by queer people. So
Jesus.
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I don't watch a lot of movies and TV show and stuff like that. Most
Hmm.
of what I watch are the cartoons that I stream on Tran for movie night, and then
Hmm.
watching manga with my girlfriend, and then MCU.
Hmm.
That's or
Yeah.
manga, Jesus, anime.
Yeah.
She's the weeb. I'm not. Um,
Yeah.
gonna go watch those mangas. But no. So I don't get a lot of exposure to a lot of media, and part of that
Hmm.
was growing up, I saw the way that queer people in general were displayed, and even before
Hmm.
I realized I was queer, it made me so incredibly uncomfortable, just the level of dehumanization.
Yeah.
Um, and something I like to, this is a terrible example, but a way that I actually like to explain to people the differences between being a cross-dresser versus being trans, because I've met so many fucking cishet people that think being trans is just cross-dressing to an
Yeah.
extreme, where it's like, oh, you don't just want to wear the clothes, you also want to wear the lifestyle, and it's like, no,
Hmm.
but it's like, there's this movie called White Chicks, which
I've
is,
seen it.
yeah, it's problematic in its
Oh
own
God.
ways.
Yeah.
Um, but it's like in that movie, the two main characters are cross dressing, and
Yes.
that's not what being trans is. I'm not sitting here taking off all of this whenever I get home. This
Mhm.
ain't a wig. This shit's real. My tits are real. Like, this isn't
Yeah.
something I take off. I'm not a cross dresser. I'm
Yeah.
not a drag queen. You know, like I go to the store, I put my pants in one leg at the time. I get catcalled and cornered in weird places like everyone
Mhm.
else.
Yeah.
And I like to point people to white chicks and be like, if you want to see cross dressing, that's cross dressing. That isn't me at all. You want to see what what it's like being a trans girl or a trans dude? Go
Mhm.
watch any movie you want and pick a random girl or guy, and then in your head tell yourself they're trans. There you go. You've done
A
it.
good point. Yeah. Sadly, a lot of more than is decent movies in the 90s focused on just portraying trans women like that, and it was
Right?
awful. Like Mrs. Doubtfire was a horrible one, and like all those. And like as a kid, I didn't know any better, and I watched them, but now it's like I'm horrified.
Mm-hmm.
Like I hate it. Like I watched after I watched Disclosure, and they went through like the whole history, the documentary Disclosure on Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
It was just it's awful, and it's awful because it was always trans women that was portrayed horribly like that, and so
Right.
it's gross.
Mm-hmm. Um, Something I wish they would touch on more, especially because and to anyone that's watching this, I'm not gonna get into the debate over trans misogyny versus trans misogyny excluded. I'm not doing that. Trans men deserve more representation. Period. Okay. Um, I think there needs to be more representation for trans dudes that just shows them being dudes. Because so many
Mm-hmm.
trans men I've met, like, they feel the sting of toxic masculinity. But whereas there's a push for cis het guys in the current generation to get out of that, and there's a lot of media portraying cis het guys not being douchebags and being good people and being actually rewarded for being good people instead of being rewarded for being toxic.
Mm-hmm.
For trans men, a lot of what I've personally seen is media that just kind of reinforces the idea that you need to be the manly man. I
Hmm.
like, for instance, my hopefully future stepson, he is a little bit of a femboy, and that's okay. And I want him to feel comfortable expressing himself, even though he is a trans man. Like, he wants to be slightly feminine, and there's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't make you less of a man. It doesn't deny your transness. It doesn't. Some guys are just into feminine shit, and they need to be allowed to
Hmm.
do that, and it's okay. And
Yeah.
I really wish we could take a lot of that social pressure, a lot of that you have to be a man or else, and just
Mm.
fucking throw it in the trash where it belongs.
Well, it's just cisnormative ideas that are forced on us.
It
It's like
really
a,
is.
it's like if you get like a cis man who's a little effeminate, it's like, oh well, he's still a dude. But if you get a trans man who's a little effeminate, it's like, are you sure you're trans and you're not just
Right?
Tom? Like it sucks. But I mean, like I went through that whole thing where when I first came out, and for the longest time, the only trans men I saw focused on, you gotta pass, you gotta be super macho, you gotta. So it's also a little bit of a problem in the trans man community, I will say. Hopefully that doesn't get me skewered, but it really is. And I mean that's why it took me so many years to accept that I could just be like literally what I told my mom was I was like, Mom, I am literally just a Shane. I am just Shane. I'm not like just think of me as Shane. Cause like the whole of who I am and what I like I wear like dresses and whatever I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
Um it in the end I am the only person who defines who I am, and what everybody else says doesn't really matter. And it takes a long time to get there, but that's really all the basis of gender is. It's not about like how good you pass or
Right.
how poorly you pass or whatever. It's
Right.
just what makes you happy, do it.
Exactly. Um, and something I've talked about in the past is like masculinity and femininity, they're very nuanced. And you
Mm.
don't see that nuance in a lot of media at all. Like, especially power fantasies, which seem to be the most common type of media that's consumed, is either power or slice of life fantasies.
Mhm.
But masculinity and femininity, manhood and womanhood, they are complex, they're nuanced, they're not black and white, and they are deeply, deeply personal, and they
Mm.
are very, very influenced by your cultural norms and what you grew up with. Like, guys used to wear
Yeah.
dresses all the time. Heels were invented for men, so were fucking thigh
Mhm.
highs. Like, you're. People
Yeah.
deserve to wear what they want and do so as they please, and it's okay,
Well, it's also the history of it is just more proof as to why gender is really just a social construct that
right?
changes all the time. Like men wore heels. I think it was because Um, it was kind of easier to ride horses, you just kinda hook them in there. I think that was part of it, but I mean, um, it's just interesting how all of a sudden it's like, well, this is for women, when it was for men, and I haven't
Mm-hmm.
done a lot of research, so I don't know where it switched, but
You're
yeah,
good.
no, gender is literally just a social construct.
Right.
That's all.
Um, so I want to touch on some spicy stuff.
Okay.
So let's talk sexual representation for trans
Mhm.
people.
Yeah.
Because whenever I see trans people being portrayed sexually in media, it
Mhm.
usually varies between hypersex or sex repulsed. There's
Yep.
almost always some kind of drugs or alcohol involved, and it's almost always abusive. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know how many times I've seen trans women in media where it's like they are nymphomaniacs that can't get enough sex, they are recovering from drugs or alcohol, and that's just part of their personality. And
Mhm.
they're in an abusive situation that they either can't or refuse to escape, and it's somehow related to their need for sex.
Mhm.
So, yeah, let's touch on that if you don't mind.
Yeah, I've also seen, especially for trans women, the sort of like the really tragic sex worker story too, which kind of goes into that. That was another thing too. Um, yeah, we definitely need more stories about just a trans person, and I mean, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be sanitized and like a,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
perfectly happy-go-lucky,
Mhm.
stuff, because that's not how life goes, but
I don't want it to be
just
sanitized. I want it to be
yeah.
honest. I want it to be written
Yeah,
by
that's
a
what I meant.
trans person.
Yeah, yeah, just like, you know, trans people are as diverse as cis people in
Hmm.
relationships, which it's so silly that you would have to say that, but yeah, like in my stories I just write, it's just how I've experienced relationships. And that's why like I want to see other trans people. I love seeing like trans romances written by trans people and like, trans erotica written by trans people because it just feels better to read because it's not like filtered through a cis lens
Hmm.
of tragedy.
It's not, oh, the incredibly dainty 104-pound trans woman grabbed her massive throbbing girl cock.
Yes.
God, it's right up there
Yeah.
with her boobs bounced boobily. Jesus.
That's exactly what it is, and that's exactly what it reads like. Is just a cis person writing a trans person. It's like
Right?
all those horrible stories of a cis male who is trying to write a woman, but he has no idea. It's literally the same thing. And it's funny you made that comparison because I never thought of that.
Right? But yeah, and like, there's so much focus on the outright sex act. Like, you never see
Hmm.
people talk about the true intimacy of having sex.
Hmm.
And especially in erotica, they bounce across that a lot of times without touching on it. But to me personally, there's a lot more excitement, a lot more joy, and a lot more pleasure from the truly intimate moments.
Hmm.
And something that I would really love to see actually portrayed well at some point for cishet people to consume is actual eroticism between two trans people, where
Hmm.
it touches on dysphoria, it touches on differences in body goals, it touches on all kinds of stuff. Because, like, if I'm getting with a trans dude, like, he's gonna have totally different body goals than mine. Seeing
Hmm.
his body may make me dysphoric. Seeing my body may make him dysphoric. There's so
Hmm.
much trust there. There has to be so much patience. And because of the potential for harm, especially without meaning to, there's so much more intimacy.
Hmm.
And, like, okay, I'm gonna be a little TMI. I'm gonna talk about my girlfriend a little bit. But like my girlfriend is also trans.
Hmm.
And she has totally different body goals than mine. Um, and so there is an incredible intimacy between she and I because what makes her dysphoric is different than what makes me dysphoric. And what may feel me empowered may make her feel very weak. And so there's this point we're at where whenever we do stuff, we have to be gentle, kind, patient, while
Hmm.
still doing the other stuff. And no matter how rough, no matter how weird, kinky, crazy everything gets,
Hmm.
there's always that underlying sense of patient understanding, acceptance, and love. And that's something that I don't see portrayed at all in any of the erotica I've read regarding trans people
Hmm.
written by cishet people, or just queer people in general.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. And personally, I should probably strive to write more of that because I've realized that a lot of stuff that I write is between trans people and cis people
Yeah,
for some weird reason. It just
that's
hit me
okay.
that this is what I default to, and I was like, I need to write more stuff between two trans people. Um, no, but that's right. I think it would be very healing for trans people to read stuff like that too, because if you never see like your real experience shown anywhere, then it's sort of like you just feel like alone or weird, or when the situation happens and you're with somebody else, it's like, like you like to think like, oh, this happens or oh, this is normal or
Hmm.
but it's hard to feel that way when you never see it. regardless of what you experience or what you feel, like a lot of people's life experiences are based on, like, oh, I've seen this before, or, oh, I've read about this before, and this is
Hmm.
fine, or this isn't fine.
It is important for people to see themselves represented in media.
Mm-hmm.
Because like, and I've talked about this before, because like my mom is, yeah. Um, but my mom has made comments in the past about like, oh, there's too many non-white people in media and shit like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember arguing with her at one point, and I was like, Mom, and this was back whenever I was a dude, but like, I remember saying like, Hey, Mom, what happens if I end up with a black chick or Hispanic chick or something? Like,
Mm-hmm.
if I have a mixed race child, your grandchild, don't you want your grandchild to have someone they can look up to? And her response was basically, well, why can't my grandchild look up to insert some generic white person?
Yeah.
And it's like, because, like, you can only do that so much before you start to notice none of them look like you. None of them
Mm-hmm.
have some of the integral experiences that you are going to have by nature of living in the society that you do with the traits that you have.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can connect with fucking. Welcome to Night Vale has a character named Tamika Flynn.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite characters. I love her so much. And whenever I first started listening to Night Vale back in the day, I remember wanting to be her so bad. I was like, fuck yeah, she makes me feel so empowered. But like, there are still experiences she's had because she's perceived as a black woman by the community, and that's more or less
Mm-hmm.
just kind of considered canon to my knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So there are experiences she has that I'm never gonna have, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so though I do look up to her, I can't completely connect to her. And I
Mm-hmm.
want, if I ever have a mixed race child, I want my child to be able to look up to people, not just, oh, I really like this person, I wish I was them, but also to be able to look up to people in media and be like, I see this person and I see myself in them. I see my traits
Mm-hmm.
in them. I can really put myself in their shoes and feel truly
Mm-hmm.
empowered and seen, you know?
Yeah. Like I matter, and
Right.
I have a place in this world too.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a really important thing for kids, especially like trans kids and just minority kids. As I've seen like videos and things going around like Twitter before of like, like a little black girl and she's watching like, like one of those Pixar films or whatever, and there's like a character who's a little black girl and you just see their face and they get so excited. And it almost makes me cry every time because I'm like, it's so sad that they even just have to get excited to see, oh my gosh, there I am. It should be normal.
Mm-hmm.
We should have representation like that anyway. It shouldn't be a surprise. But, maybe one day we'll get there.
One day, hopefully.
Yeah.
Fun times. Well, I think we've really touched on just about everything I can think of on this topic. Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, we did touch on everything.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Shane, it was a pleasure to have you. Before we end this, though, would you be willing to tell our viewers where they can find your work?
Yeah. Right now, honestly, the easiest way to say it is I have one main hub that links to like everything, and it's my website, and it's
Mm-hmm.
just my name, ShaneBlackheart.card, which is two R's. So ShaneBlackheart.card.co.
Okay. And I will provide a link to that in the description of this video.
Mm,
Cool.
thank you.
Of course. Well, I love you all. Thank you all for watching. Sorry for the technical difficulties. That wasn't planned. Of course, it never is. I love you all. Y'all are amazing. Make sure to eat and drink. And Shane, thank you again for being here and going through all of this with us. I know it was probably a little bit emotionally taxing. I know I'm definitely going to go get me some popcorn and relax for a little bit.
I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good.
Well,
I have cookies and coffee and all kinds of good things, so I'm
Well, that
good.
you're lucky. You're lucky. I wish I could come get some cookies. Okay. Well,
All right.
thank you. You're awesome, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right. You too. Thank you.
Bye.